A piece in the puzzle of program planning, instructional design.
Hi, I am Martin Armstrong. The reason behind why I chose designing instructional plans is it fits nicely into my teaching practice at Chilliwack Secondary School. As a teacher, I believe it is essential to understand the role and interconnection between program goals, program objectives, and learning outcomes. Learning objectives are at the heart of designing instructional plans and learner success in knowledge construction.
Hi, I am Captain Martin from the Starship ZPD. We are going to take you on a voyage of exploration through Caffarella's planning programs for adult learners to set the stage for my presentation in designing instructional plans.
Hi, I am your navigator, Brenda. Before I can plot a course, Mr. Speck, I need a starting point.
Hi, I am Speck. Caffarella's interactive program model allows lessons and or skills to be enacted, embodied, and or realized.
Thank you, Mr. Speck. Navigator, let's start with discerning the content.
This is a major component that designers address as they design education program.
Captain, I am encountering a number of stakeholders who wish to be included in the planning process.
Captain, I suggest now that we know the context of the program, and before the Starship ZPD moves forward in the planning process, we need to build a solid layer of support.
Captain Martin, we need to identify some program ideas.
Navigator, I will develop a needs assessment that will reduce the number of ideas to a manageable portion.
Mr. Speck, you are going to prioritize the program ideas by selecting people who can do the job using quantitative and qualitative approaches.
Captain, we need to develop program objectives before you can start your lesson on designing instruction plans.
Captain, I suggest we ensure that the program objectives are clearly written, are related to what the participants will learn.
I believe the crew of the Starship SPD is ready to tackle the tasks of presenting a lesson on designing instructional plans. Do not forget the journey is far from over. After my presentation, you need to examine transfer of learning, make budgets to run the program, design evaluation plans, develop a schedule to run the program and staff who will teach, coordinate a place to hold the program and evaluate whether it worked.
I am taking us in. Enjoy the presentation.
Some important terms. Program goals, program objectives, and learning outcomes. Learning objectives are the foundation of the instructional plan. Connecting the pieces of instructional design. I have broken down instructional design into 5 basic questions. At the center of the puzzle is a foundation question on which designing instructional plans is built. The first piece of the puzzle I will start with is how to set the tone of the program through the development of learning objectives. Setting the tone for designing instruction centers on the careful selection of learning objectives. Learning objectives provide a clear direction of what the participant in the program are required to do. Clarity is the key to effective and successful design of instructional plans. According to Caffarella, the 5 major categories of learning outcomes are acquisition of knowledge, such as knowing how a thing works or its principles of meaning, enhancement of cognitive skills, such as acquiring new knowledge and using it in a practical application, development of psychomotor skills, such as learning to drive a car or play a sport, strengthening of problem solving and finding solutions, knowing something is the case, such as all the vowels in the alphabet are odd numbers. Changes in attitudes, values, beliefs, and or feelings focuses on identifying and sharing how the course has influenced the learner's mental state and influenced the way they do things or choices they make. In planning instructional design, the major use of learning objectives centers on providing a focus and consistency for design of instruction to ensure the focus of the program is clear to both the instructor and participants. This is similar to using binoculars. Also provides a guideline for choosing course content and instructional method. Provides a basis for evaluation of what participants have learned, and also provides a direction for learners to help them organize their own learning, providing them with a clear roadmap to knowledge construction. Learning objectives should be stated clearly and concisely, so the learner can understand what they will be able to know at the end of the program. To facilitate this, a simple procedure is followed, ensuring that the center of the learning objective is an action verb which defines a clear direction. Who is the learner? How the learner will learn, which is the action verb. What the learner will learn, which is the content, conditions under which learning is to be demonstrated, standards and/or criteria for acceptable performance. The learning objective I created for this lesson is the participant will be able to determine the role learning objectives have in designing instructional plans. This indicates a clear direction for the participants in this presentation. Some considerations in stating the learning objective are that a specific behavior or performance criterion is not applicable in most situations when the learning outcomes focus on creativity, sensitivity, confidence, feelings, attitudes, and values. Also on micro and/or macro cultural influences. Learning objectives must have meaning for learners and instructors, be easy to understand, and provide a clear direction for the program and/or instructional training. The second question I'm going to examine in designing instructional plans is how to organize and select manageable content. Where to start in choosing content. One of the challenges facing instructors is choosing what will be learned because they can rarely include all the material they would like to teach. The place to start in choosing content is the learning objective. As the process proceeds, key points and topics will be selected for each learning objective. This may lead to revision of the learning objective, deletion, or even the addition of new learning objectives. Similar to a 3-layer cake, Smith and Delia provide the following guidelines on how to select the final content. I will start at the bottom of the cake, starting with what participants must know. This is content that is essential to the learning objective. In the second layer, what participants should know, content that complements the essential material if there is time to include it. On the top layer, or the icing on the cake, is what participants could know, interesting and relevant content that is not essential. This may be included if time allows. However, as an instructor and/or developer, it is vital not to overemphasize topics or repeat material that is not central to learning. The content selection needs to focus on important points and ideas. Although there is no general rule in ordering content, the participants' experience and knowledge, type of content, levels of achievement required, and teaching and learning styles of those involved must be considered in choosing content. In designing instructional plans, it is important to give consideration to utilizing a basic guideline in choosing content based on the following suggested criteria. Take into account what participants know. Provide learners with a framework to organize what they learn and how they will use it. Introduce key concepts and terms early and re-emphasize them throughout the instructional unit. Start with the familiar material and move to the less familiar. Use successful scaffolding of material by ensuring basic skills and knowledge is well-founded at the start of the program in the learner. Start with the most important ideas and move to the least important. Teach the least difficult and move towards the most difficult to scaffold skills. Do not overload students with too much at once. Ground learning in relevant instructional activities to ensure learning transfer to their context of application. Designers and instructors need to be aware of 3 stumbling blocks when organizing instruction. Many instructors try to teach too much material for the time allotted. Instructors teach more than the learners are motivated to absorb. Instructors do not take into account the context learning takes place. Remember, it is a fluid process in choosing content. Objectives, content, and evaluation may change or need to be adapted during the planning and implementation of instruction. I have currently taken on a student teacher in my class and emphasized to her the importance of adapting and even changing the lesson if you see it is not working. The third question in planning instructional designs is, what are some of the considerations in choosing instructional techniques? Although there is no best way to assist people to learn, instructors need to take into account the following 10 factors when considering instructional techniques. The 10 factors to consider are learning objective, instructor, learner, context, transfer of learning, content, technique characteristics, variety, logistical constraints, and time. In this presentation, I will examine the first 4 in some detail and briefly explain the rest. This is not due to lessening the importance of any, only based on time constraints of the presentation. Instructional techniques must be chosen based on the focus of the learning objective. Consider the 5 learning outcomes when selecting instructional techniques. Also, consideration must be given that one technique will fit more than one learning outcome. In acquiring knowledge, this adult is using a web-based search engine in combination with audio and visual conferencing on an online course. In developing psychomotor skills, this adult learner is using a game simulation to develop organizational and office skills using a uni-learning educational game. In enhancing cognitive skills, these adult learners are participating in a quiet meeting and reflecting on a topic or problem before continuing the work on the case study. Strengthening problem-solving and finding capabilities. In this picture, although this picture represents the death of Socrates, it connects the idea of an expert using guiding questions to promote learning and knowledge construction. Changing attitudes, beliefs, values, and/or feelings, this role-playing in caregiving will lead into a student's reflecting on their feelings during this procedure. Some considerations about instructors when choosing the best possible instructional technique. You need to consider the instructor's capability, skill, knowledge, and confidence when choosing an instructional technique. Instructors may overcome initial unfamiliarity with technique by trial and error with the student's consent. For adult learners, the instructor must consider the concept of active learner or high participant involvement in the learning process and move towards this. You need to consider that in the classroom there is a variety of learning styles and choose instructional techniques accordingly, i.e., two classes may require different approaches. In choosing instructional techniques for the designing of instructional plans, considerations must be given to what the learner brings to the learning table, i.e., experiences, abilities, preferred ways of learning. Instructors need to be conscious of the nuances of culture, whether it is gender, ethnic, economic, political, social, etc. Instructors need to reflect on their own biases in choosing instructional techniques, biases on what works best, or biases of the course, student's learning environment. Instructors need to be adaptable to the learning environment of the student, change their views of the learner, adapt or change the way they teach, and even change the content they teach. Instructors need to take into account the differences of learners and adopt these three norms into their practice. They must consider and accept difference, they must consider learners learn in a multitude of ways, and they have to design instruction to acknowledge this difference to enhance the what, where, and when of learning environments. Why is context important in determining the instructional technique to be used? First, context is defined in terms of social identity being constructed and displayed in text and talk by language users. It is influenced by space. This classroom influences space by pairing the learners in a technology-rich environment. In determining the instructional technique to be used, the context of learning must be considered. Some learning techniques are enhanced while others are inhibited by the context where learning takes place. The rest of the factors in considering instructional techniques: transfer of learning, content, technique characteristics, variety, logistical constraints, and time. The fourth question in the puzzle of designing instructional plans: what are some of the criteria needed in choosing workable instructional resources? Although this presentation is presented as a YouTube video, the starting point was PowerPoint. Therefore, choosing the correct instructional resources is directly linked to the instructional technique. Choose resources that take advantage of the context learning is placed in. Choose materials that easily emphasize what is being taught. Choose engaging materials. Use a variety of resources and do not overuse one. Select available resources and those that can be designed in the needed time. Carefully select resources to enhance the learning environment and engage the learner. The mock-up is a realistic way to use resources in adult training in medical techniques. The use of printed materials such as graphs allow connections to be made over time. Bringing TV or video into the classroom can enhance the learning environment. Providing access to the World Wide Web provides asynchronous discussion. Use of interactive Web 2.0 technology such as Google Docs builds upon the social media usage of adult learners, placing learning in a relevant, realistic, real-time learning paradigm. Some considerations in selecting instructional resources. Before developing and/or contracting out for instructional resources, explore what materials already exist. Program planners need to consider restrictions on the use of instructional resources, such as copyright, who owns it, cost for material. It is important to discuss with the vendor if the instructional resources can be altered to meet the needs of the program. Finally, and most important, will the selection of the resources improve learning? The last piece in the puzzle of designing instructional plans is how to assess students and program success. 5 things to consider when incorporating assessment into designing instructional plans. You need to assess student readiness for the program. You need to assess throughout the program to improve learning. You need to assess to improve instructional processes. You need to assess to evaluate the effectiveness of the program. Therefore, assessment needs to match the focus of the learning objective.
As the lesson concludes, I have provided some resources that may be used to further understand designing instructional plans. Along with a copy of my notes, they will be located as links in the threads accompanying my presentation posting. Also, I will add threads to participate in the questions and a link to provide feedback on this presentation. Thank you.